This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Isaac Lidsky. Isaac has a great story. As a young guy living a normal life, as an early teenager, he found out due to a rare condition he would go blind. And he did go blind. But that has not stopped him at all. A graduate of Harvard, degrees in mathematics, computer science, once a practicing attorney. In fact, he is the only blind person to have ever clerked at the U.S. Supreme Court. Not only is his story one of overcoming a really rough obstacle, but today, he's like all of us. He's overcome that obstacle, but he's also overcome the obstacle of just being a regular person at a regular desk job, because now he is a full-blown entrepreneur with a great story that you can easily find on TED. A wide-ranging conversation, motivating as hell. I hope you enjoy my talk with Isaac Lidsky. Isaac, so I had this interview the other day with this guy named Donald Hoffman. I do this interview. It's a fascinating subject about reality, perception. And then I start preparing for your interview, and I'm thinking to myself, hold on, how did I even find out about Don? I must have found out about Don by preparing for you several weeks ago, and then I asked him to appear on the show, and then when I'm reading your book, I'm like, oh my gosh, these things all connect. So I did not even realize that I had asked him because of your work.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny. I've never spoken with him personally. Read a lot of his stuff and definitely watched his TED Talk. And as you say, I mean, in the first chapter of my book, I mentioned him. I got to be honest with you. You should probably reach right out to him. His college email on his website, boom, his professor email, and I'm sure he would love to have a chat. Really, he's a terribly interesting guy. How did you first find out about his work? Well, it's a subject that's important to me, and I think about it a lot, read about it a lot, and definitely he's someone who's very prominent in that space. His idea being basically that the experience of sight, the mechanism of sight in the human mind isn't really intended to represent the world with accuracy so much as it's intended to be useful to us in the sort of evolutionary pursuits of procreation and survival. And it's a fascinating sort of idea. Intuitively, you think, oh, sight is to represent the world as accurately as possible, and it makes a lot of intuitive sense. But Hoffman suggests that's wrong. It's especially useful, interesting, considering your personal situation. I mean, not having sight at this moment in your life, and who knows what science will unfold in the future, but not having sight at this moment in your life, it really, for me, I was sitting here today, I was like, wow, what an interesting turn of events, interesting example to, something I never would have thought about until I got into Don's work, and then you take it a step further because you're essentially living it. The way in which I lost my sight sort of progressively over time, through a kind of, progressive deterioration of my retinas, produced a lot of very bizarre, experiences for me, and really kind of shattered the illusion that, sight is this, objective sort of truth that you're perceiving. That's obviously, a big part of why I was so drawn to Hoffman's ideas. I really do think that sight is just a great sort of case study or metaphor for the ways in which we are so empowered to shape our own realities, to, basically create the lives we live, but don't necessarily realize that we're doing it.
Let me take you back in time. I kind of take you off in this tangent in the beginning. Some people are going to think, what are these two guys talking about? But let me take you back in time. So you're about 13 years of age, and I can remember being 13. I had just finished Little League. I was a baseball player. We hit the big diamonds, and all of a sudden I was terrible in Little League, and all of a sudden I was pretty good as a 13-year-old player on the big diamond. And it was a really huge part of my life. 13 years of age, and I never would have thought about not seeing. And here you are as a comparable 13-year-old boy, and you're being told at some point in time in the next 10, 20, or 30 years, you will have no sight. That must have just been the punch in the gut of all punches in the gut. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I sort of confronted, pure visceral fear for the first time in my life, when I was told, as you say, you have a genetic disease of the retina, and you're going to progressively lose your sight and go blind. The doctor told us there are no treatments, there are no cures, we don't know much about the disease. Good luck. Here's tough.
But you became even though you started to have the progressive degeneration over the next 5, 6, 7 years, and you did very well in school, obviously. But speak to, when was the moment that once you get past that initial, man, this is going to be terrible, or was it not until you were entirely blind? When was or is it just there's a whole series of steps going on there? But I guess what I'm looking for is that point in time, or maybe it was multiple points in time, where you really took ownership and became the guy that was on the TED stage in 2016.
Obviously, the full story is always more complicated and nuanced. But to the extent there was an aha moment for me, it came when I visited with an occupational therapist, a low vision rehabilitation specialist in Boston. At this time, I was kind of living this awful reality of my fears, which was a fiction, but I believed it. Where, I was certain that, as my sight faded, as blindness approached, it would kind of be the end of achievement for me and it would ruin my life. It was very much this, praying and hoping for the scientists to rescue me in time. Meanwhile, not doing much, by way of, figuring out solutions for myself. So I wind up with this low vision rehabilitation specialist, as I mentioned. She asks me if I use a cane for the visually impaired, and it just struck me as such an odd question. Of course not. I don't use a cane. I thought, isn't she supposed to be the expert? And, by the way, I see too well to use a cane now. And that's even an arbitrary detail. Who cares about the cane? I'm here to talk about this, this awful, boogeyman blindness that's going to ruin my life. She asked if I bump into things and hurt myself. And of course I did. I bumped into things and hurt myself all the time back then. And, I told her as much, tried to convey that I couldn't care less about that. It's not about bumping into things. It's about this, awful future. And, she said, if you use the cane, you'd bump into things less and you'd hurt yourself less. And it sounds silly, but it really was this moment of like, oh my God, there's no like awful, gloom and doom tomorrow that I've been obsessed about. There's only right now, this moment, and what can I do about my life, right now, solve the problems. Kind of in that moment, I've realized that much like sight itself is this immersive experience that we just perceive as reality, when it's not, when it's sort of manufactured truth. I was living the reality of my fears, as though they were, inalterable, inescapable, facts. They were pure fallacy, pure mental construction of my own making that I was subjecting myself to. That was really the eyes wide open sort of moment or realization, when I began to look at my life very seriously and see, if there were other instances where, again, I was unknowingly living a reality of my own making, and if I could choose to live a different way.
Yeah, and you just keep taking step by step by step and building each iterative step upon the other. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and she was talking about finding her passion. But this particular person has not been able to find her passion. And so instead, she's not even really started. She keeps delaying and delaying and delaying. And there's excuses and excuses and excuses. And not to kind of give all kinds of praise to you, but it's such a great example. I mean, literally, when you look at your life and the achievements you've had, I mean, for people that are completely able-bodied and have now, and of course, we could go off on the tangent about eyesight, and perhaps you might even say today, you don't even think about not having your eyesight. I'm not sure. But the point being is that so many people that have everything, so to speak, physically, just don't take the step. And then I look at your world and it's like, for me, I'm used to taking steps. I don't have the disadvantage of not being able to see. Again, you might say it's an advantage right now at this point in your life, but still, it's motivating as hell. That's what I'm trying to say. It's just motivating. And I think unless you, if I don't know, unless dead people or someone that's in a coffin would not be motivated. I mean, you've got to be motivated. I think that's just what I really love. I know that probably sounds like a kind of a crazy question, but I think you know where I'm going with that.
No, I hear you, and I appreciate it. What comes to mind for me is, there's an assumption. And it's a fair one, and in some respects it's true. But people look at me and my life and my story, and still there's this sense that blindness is this awful, horrendous thing that I had to overcome, and it kind of makes everything amazing. There's a blind comedian. It's not my line, but I heard the line. He says, "When you're blind and lazy, people think you're just blind." So it's kind of like, it makes everything else seem incredible. So for me, I don't look at blindness or think about blindness that way. I mean, obviously it was a major challenge to overcome, to adapt, to integrate blindness into my life and lose my sight. And to this day, there are a lot of practical challenges. For me, it's just part of who I am. It's part of my life and my journey. And really, I mean this sincerely. It wound up being one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, because this peek behind the curtain at the sort of visual system, and then the ability to kind of apply that, the insights gained to sort of life more broadly. I am so blessed to live a life of, joy and fulfillment. I don't look at my blindness as some, awful thing that somehow heightens my other experiences.
Let me ask a practical, curious type question. So you lose your sight. What happened to your other senses?
The cute answer is absolutely nothing, right? So I don't hear any better because I went blind. If an audiologist tested my ears, now compared to when I was 13, if anything, I probably hear worse, right? Just because of the aging process. My ability to use my other senses, however, is greatly, heightened and adapted, as I lost my sight. And that's another just beautiful thing. It was a really neat experience. Your ears can do so much for you, or I guess more precisely, you can get so much out of the information you perceive with your ears. But, we are so fundamentally visual creatures. We really don't expect much of our ears, don't pay too much attention. So it's just been neat to see how other pathways of perception have really, evolved.
Give an example. So you obviously can have a memory of, probably not as clear given it's been many decades, but a memory of sight and perhaps what your hearing was then. And you were able to, as you just described there, to know the difference that is unfolded now. What would be the difference that's unfolded for you? The hearing difference.
I can give you maybe a couple of examples. So I listen to books and documents now far more quickly than I could ever read. So the average American English speaker speaks about 150 words a minute, and I can listen to between 700 and 750.
Do you just turn the high speed up on the iTunes or something?
All the way, yes, is the short answer. And that's just something that developed over time, slowly kind of nudging the speed up and becoming used to taking in information that way. But in terms of, Another, I guess, example, another way to look at it is Dorothy and I went with another couple to a restaurant that, none of us had ever been to before. We got to the table, we sat down, and the woman we were with said, does anyone know where the bathroom is? And, Dorothy said, I think it's probably in that corner back there, off the corner. Visually, that looked like where, quote unquote should be. Before even realizing it, I jumped in and said, no, remember when we made that, turn, off the bar into that hallway and then made, another right turn? If you had made a left instead and gone down the stairs, that's where the bathroom is. And people were like, what the heck are you talking about? And it even struck me for a second. I was like, what the heck am I talking about? But just walking to the table from the hostess stand, I heard and smelled and, felt the atmosphere of the bar and knew I was in a bar. And then we made a right turn and could feel that we were in a narrow space and narrow hallways. And, and then, got to the end of the hall, we made another right turn and I heard, a woman's sandals kind of hitting the stairs as she kind of walked up the stairs. Could kind of feel a sort of poorly ventilated space down below and heard a toilet flush. And then, we got to the table. It was totally obvious to me exactly where the bathroom was, even though, I couldn't see. All three of the people I, was with, saw perfectly well, but had no idea where the bathroom was. So, that's, I don't know if that is
heightened state.
Yeah. Well, it's more like, it's more just having free computational cycles, right? I mean, sight is a processing power hog. I mean, your sight can claim as much as 2/3 of your brain's processing power. So you shut that off and you got a lot of cycles.
As I was thinking about this conversation, there's only so much I want to talk about in terms of your lack of vision, because the book, your work, is just motivating to anybody that needs a swift kick in the you-know-what to go take the next step. Because really, I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way too. At some stage of the game, yes, it's interesting and it's a hell of a story, but the reality is the big picture message, I mean, it's this great foundation where you've lived this life, you've gone through this trauma, you've overcome. Okay, but then once you're past that, it's like you're just one of the guys giving the advice that if any of us look past, we're all kind of slightly brain dead.
Thank you for saying that. For me, blindness is relevant to my story in as much as, it helped me to sort of gain this eyes wide open insight. And obviously it was a very sort of intense aspect of my life in many ways. But you're right. The reason why I wrote the book, and the reason why I, travel and talk about it is because this eyes wide open vision really has nothing to do with blindness at the end of the day, or sight, or overcoming disability or challenges. It really, at the end of the day, what eyes wide open is about is making the choice to take control of the reality you're creating for yourself. So choosing in every moment who you want to be, how you want to live your life, and critically holding yourself accountable for those choices. And, at the end of the day, that's the bottom line.
That was going to be my next point, actually, holding yourself accountable. I mean, that is the starting point. There's a lot of areas we're going to branch off from there, but that's it. And I can't tell you how many people, and I'm sure perhaps even you more than me, how many people I bump into or I talk to, and you can see in their head the gears turning, the walls going up, and the rationalizations, the justifications, the every damn reason under the sun to not hold themselves accountable.
It's awful.
It's got to be a little tricky sometimes for you to give advice or for you to give perspective if people have just met you, because they want to make all kinds of assumptions, don't they?
Yes, we all do all the time. I mean, we're wired to do it. At our core, we are wired to predict, infer, assume, to reason from past experiences. So we all do it. I do it myself. I try to be aware of it. People do make all kinds of assumptions about me on the basis of a single attribute, right? My blindness. It is what it is. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes it's disruptive or, impedes more meaningful connection. In terms of, you say advice, in terms of sort of sharing my vision and my ideas, I am completely at peace with the fact that I can do my best to explain, to put it out there, to share. Beyond that is really, not in my control. What people do with, what people will make of the book, what people will think about it, what people make of me and my blindness, I can endeavor to explain, but it's not in my control.
Let's shift into a core topic area I know near and dear to you, luck and skill. So many people bounce through life. They bounce through life saying, hey, that guy was lucky. I'm sure even people are going to look at your situation and say, oh, he was just lucky. Everything was just lucky. And of course, look, luck plays a huge role in all of our lives. But to discount skill, to discount effort, to discount tenacity, man, so many people they put the horse blinders on and say, he's just lucky, and they never lift a finger. We
misperceive luck in many ways in our lives and even just sort of as a concept. I use the metaphor of poker to kind of talk about the way I look at luck. For me, the biggest sort of, I guess, point I would want to make on the subject is that we have this tendency to believe that we can isolate one event or circumstance or moment, kind of play our lives forward, having changed just that one detail and somehow understand or contemplate, what it would look like if we could just make that one change. And the truth of the matter is that that's just craziness. Our lives are absolutely chaotic, and there's all these interdependent threads and themes and moments. And to me, it's such a waste of sort of psychic energy to get caught up on, well, man, what would my life look like if this were different, or what would be what would be happening right now today if earlier, I hadn't done this.
I think where you're going with that is decision making. And if you so many people get caught up and they say, well, I made this decision when I was 23, and they're looking back at 50 and they didn't do anything for, the 27 years since then. And that so many people are fixated on this static decision that they imagine is unchangeable. And I think that is one of the things to take away from your work is, hey, if you make a decision and it's wrong, move on, try again, start over.
On a related note, we also have a tendency to, we'll make a decision, and then after the fact, we'll want to go back and kind of change our assessment of the quality of our decision based on the results. And that, to me, is another thing that's kind of, unfortunate or at least interesting to think about.
Process versus outcome.
I joke that I might write another book called Doesn't Mean I'm Not an Idiot. And people make bad decisions in business, for example. People make bad business decisions and it works out, and it, sometimes is a huge success. And then they want to, go back and fool themselves into thinking that it was a great decision. But the far worse case, the more unfortunate case, to my mind at least, is people make great decisions that don't pan out. And then somehow, because it didn't work out, we go back, we berate ourselves, we criticize ourselves, and we convince ourselves that it was a terrible decision. But that's not, it can't be that the quality of a decision is somehow dependent on later events.
I think also too is that we're so voyeuristic on looking at other people's decisions. For example, I was thinking of this one the other day. There's a great book about Bill Gates called Hard Drive from years back. And if I think I remember correctly, Gates was essentially negotiating with IBM, did not have an operating system, but knew some guys in New Mexico that had something called DOS. So he essentially was cutting the deal with the IBM and then turned around and bought DOS for 50 grand and then cut the deal with IBM. What in blazes can any of us use that whole little series of events for today? How does that help us?
That's funny. I am familiar with that story. It is a great story, but you're right. I mean,
it's a great move on his part, a great deal, very clever, very smart, and of course he made a zillion other decisions after that to grow the company. But
and before,
right? But I think sometimes we get fixated on these one things, like, oh, that guy did this or that. There's as you just mentioned, there's plenty of people out there, and I'm not saying Gates this was just all luck. There's obviously a little luck for everybody, but looking at a big player, so to speak, and we're going to talk about something that's happened in your life that's pretty phenomenal in terms of business. It's just a lot. You talk about psychic energy. It's a huge loss of psychic energy to look at somebody else's situation and kind of feel a little bit envy, kind of feel a little bit jealousy. That is the biggest non-starter, isn't it?
Yes, and to your point as well. You know, we like the simple story, right? The overnight success, the one deal, the one move, and just nothing in life is plain and simple. Everything is, you know, nuance and complexity. You know, and we make our own luck. We really do. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, I'm a big believer in luck, and I find that the harder I work, the more I have of it. Like back to the poker metaphor. People think, oh, you know, Texas Hold'em's a game of chance, right? It's luck, it's the shuffle of the deck. Well, then how come, you know, the best players are consistently the best players and, you know, do well over time? It's because they know how to play their hand.
Let me give a practical example in your life, overcoming in terms of business success. So post the 2008 crisis, you're a practicing attorney?
Yes.
And this is not doing it for you. You want something else. What's going on inside you where you're saying, you know, you spent all this time. I mean, you clerked at the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Ginsburg. I mean, these are incredible experiences for those people that have studied the law. So what makes you all of a sudden, I don't know if it's all of a sudden, but what makes you want to say, I need something different?
Yeah, so I had phenomenal experiences in the public sector, at their court, as you mentioned, and then also I litigated appeals for the civil division of the Justice Department for a few years, which was amazing. I then, you know, kind of opted for the sort of quote-unquote easy and obvious path of going to a big, fancy international law firm, huge signing bonus, everything was going to be great. Dorothy and I lived in London for a year. I worked for them out of their London office, and then, you know, we moved to Manhattan. I worked out of their New York office. And that's when I was really just unhappy. I didn't like what I was doing, every day, and I didn't feel good about my professional life. I thought long and hard about it and said, you know, well, you know, is it crazy to make a change here? And I didn't think it was. I met with a, you know, career coach and talked to her for a while. She ran all sorts of, you know, tests or whatever. I did, you know, questionnaires and surveys. We agreed that,
this guy can't work for anybody.
Yeah, exactly. That I'm ill suited to work for anybody but myself. So, which was totally useless advice at the time, right? No one was looking to hire me as a chief executive at the time, I assure you. One of my best friends, my college roommate, Zach, we were talking about this and he said, you know, why don't we buy a small business together and, you know, you can run it, in essence, buy me a job. And I was so blown away, one, by his, you know, support and faith and, in me and two, just love the idea. So that's what we did.
If I recall, you were not exactly preoccupied with the particular business. It was the challenge of acquiring a business and perhaps rehabbing it, bringing it back to life. But you weren't like fixated on, I must do this type of business.
That's exactly right. So Zach and I spent a lot of time, you know, talking and thinking about sort of a set of criteria for the type of business we would be looking for. So, you know, we had, you know, sort of a list of requirements, so to speak. In large part, the timing was critical to the move. This was the very end of 2010, the beginning of 2011. So, you know, the economy was in a state of misery and you had industries that were at or near, you know, once in a lifetime lows. And, you know, we kind of thought, this is a golden opportunity for us to be able to, you know, buy a small sort of struggling business and try to create something, you know, excellent of our own. So that's what we did. But you're right. No, we didn't necessarily pick a particular industry. We actually wound up making offers on businesses in a variety of industries. From the beginning, I will say construction was very attractive to us because, particularly residential construction. I mean, at that time, the, you know, residential construction market, the housing market was just so devastated, and had been for years, that, you know, I joked with Zach that, you know, no matter how much I messed it up, you know, hopefully our timing would save us.
You know, I made a documentary film across 2007 to 2009. I did a lot of filming in Florida, in particular Orlando, in particular Miami. and it was a residential wasteland.
It was unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah,
They built 35,000 new homes in Orlando alone in 2005. And in 2009, they built less than 5,000.
So you make the decision to go with residential home construction. You acquire this business. Paint the picture for the financials out of the gate, what you're facing, and perhaps to the details, to the extent you can describe acquiring and what you were facing, what kind of hole you were facing. Because it's always something, if you're buying something like this, it probably always gets a little hairier once you get inside, and once you're the owner, it's probably a little worse than you might have expected.
No question. So let's see, in retrospect, we had no idea what we were doing, but, we were sure as heck going to try. So Zach put up a substantial amount of his savings, to fund the purchase. He kept his fancy day job. I put literally every penny of Dorothy and mine into the acquisition. Zach and I then, borrowed some money from a bank as well to fund the acquisition, signing, personal guarantees. We had analyzed the, data from the former owner, unsophisticated sole proprietor kind of thing. And, we, like you said, you always know it's never going to be better than you think when you buy a business and show up and actually, get under the hood, to mix my metaphors. We were convinced that the company was at least getting by, treading water. And that turned out to be just not true at all. All the information we had analyzed was really garbage in, garbage out, nonsense. And the company was in actually very dire straits. We realized just 2-3 months in that we were basically hemorrhaging money. So that was a pretty lousy time in my life, having just, moved my
You left the steady law job, and now you're
left the steady law job. Complaining to my wife about my metaphysical discontent with the practice of law. Now we're talking about how I might need to go through a bankruptcy and how it's unlikely that a law firm would hire me. After a bankruptcy, we had giddily swapped our apartment for a house we rented in Orlando, and now we were talking about moving in with our parents. So it was a real rough time, but baptism by fire, as they say. So we dug in, and blessed with a phenomenal team, including our third partner, a guy named Tony Hartsgrove, who we ultimately took on as a partner in the business, and he's now the president of the company. And together we figured it out.
I really don't think you ever thought about failure with this particular project, and perhaps with many things in your life. And I've seen how you have described it. Instead of failure, just continue.
I talk about in the face of this type of struggle, ongoing sort of sustained struggle. To me, I try to focus on two things. One, what is it that I truly am endeavoring to accomplish, right? And it's important to be very sort of precise and honest and transparent with yourself in terms of what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. And then the second question is, what's my best next step, right? You're not going to get from A to Z without getting from A to B. And the world's going to change a million times between A and Z anyway, as you are too. That was my focus. And it took effort to not panic, not freak out. I was miserable. It was a really rough time for me. So, it was a daily effort to maintain that perspective. But that's what I endeavor to do. What is it that I'm trying to accomplish, and what's the best next step?
You talk about this in your work. We haven't really talked about it in this conversation yet. Fear. And I've made some notes here. Fear distorts reality, fills the void, lulls you into inaction. Paralyzes you. This fear that we create in our minds to stop us from either taking a step or meeting someone new, trying something new. This is the single, perhaps most debilitating feature of the human condition. We create monsters in our mind that are not there.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, fear is just an incredibly destructive force in our lives if we let it be. So, but you're right. So fear. The psychological term for it, I guess, is awfulizing. Psychologists call it awfulizing. I think it's a great term. That's what we do, right?
Define it for the audience. Awfulizing.
It's awfulizing. We make matters, circumstances, they're most awful in our minds. We imagine the worst case scenario, and we unknowingly, unwittingly embrace the worst case scenario as the sort of guaranteed outcome. That's what I did when I was diagnosed with my blinding disease. I literally knew that blindness was going to completely ruin my life. I didn't think it. I knew it. As I talk about a lot in the book, fear has some pretty powerful accomplices in convincing us that, convincing us to accept this sort of baseless reality that we concoct in our minds. And so that, I talk about heroes and villains. For fear to perpetuate this sort of awful reality, it's gotta trick you into playing your part, right? Trick you into, not sort of breaking the spell. And that's, I think, where heroes and villains come in, because fear sort of conjures up a world where it's very easy for us to blame others and celebrate others and watch some drama play out where where what's really important is that we basically outsourced our destiny. And that is exactly what happened for me. My villain was blindness. My heroes were the brilliant research scientists who were working so hard to develop cures. My life was a race against time, a race to try to get out ahead of this awful reality. This literally death sentence for my independence and achievement. And I was not running the race. I was on the sideline.
Getting in the game is such a huge part of this. So many people sit on the sidelines.
Yeah. So we talked earlier about that moment in Chris's office, the low vision rehabilitation specialist. And it was just this incredible moment to say, like, what do I actually know about going blind and being blind? Nothing. I don't know anything about it. What have I done to learn about it? Absolutely nothing. And by the way, cheering on these scientists and hoping they're going to cure my disease probably isn't, a terribly practical way to improve the quality of my life, literally. Sure, I can use a cane. Chris taught me about screen reading software to interact with my computer and a million other things. And it was just, again, like the shattering of the illusion of sight, for me, that moment it was like all of a sudden, man, I was duped by fear.
You talk about in your work that how you feel affects what you see. That is for people that might hear that without thinking about it on first blush. Well, hold on. What I see is what I see. What do you mean how I feel affects what I see? Countless studies demonstrate this. So if you're asked to estimate the walking speed of a man in a video, your answer will be different if you're told to think about cheetahs or turtles. A hill looks steeper to you if you're wearing a heavy backpack, and a landmark looks farther away if you've just exercised. Sight is this virtual reality that's totally unique to you, and it both impacts and is impacted by memories, opinions, emotions, as you said, your conceptual understanding of the world, other knowledge, and it's predictive. It's your mind trying to make its best guess using all of these things and your past experiences, and yet it feels so real, right? It is totally natural. You open your eyes, there's the world. Seeing is believing, sight is truth. And that sort of fundamental contradiction is, to me, so striking. It's just so amazing. And it's important. It's an important insight into the way the mind works. And it's really, and you make this point in your work, if one spends significant time at least thinking about happiness, trying to be in a happy state. Being in that happy state alone is going to allow you to see the world every day completely differently than if you were in a depressed state.
Absolutely.
Let me end on this last point, which I think is really great. I want you to explain it to people because I think I've not heard someone describe it as you, but you've got a thought that you've put together, a heart sight. Mm-hmm. That you've reached this point now where you have this heart sight, and it really sounds like it's such a huge driver for you today in your life.
This is another, I think, myth that we tell ourselves. We like this idea of this sort of purely rational perspective. You know, in my experience, that's somewhat of a delusion, right? I mean, we're creatures of the heart. And I think to the extent we are willing to explore our own hearts, to acknowledge and embrace our emotions, what people mean to us in our lives, the richer the journey, the better the experiences. So, and this is, I speak as someone who resisted for many years this idea. For many years, I hid in my mind, and I insisted that I was, purely rational. I had no need for the heart. But man, was I wrong.
Just one of those fantastic reminders. I like to think that I'm already in your headspace. I like to think that I'm already going down the similar process of life, being open to the new that comes along and keeping the fear at bay. But it's always nice to see the reminder, the different way of saying something that you think you already know, and having a different light shown on the concept. So I appreciate that.
Excellent. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Isaac, where can we send people?
Yeah, if you'd like more information about my work, I have a website, lidsky.com. It's just my last name, L-I-D, as in David, S as in Sam, K-Y.com. You can find information there about my book, which is called Eyes Wide Open. And the book is for sale, basically any retailer, online or otherwise. You should be able to find it. I hope people will read it, and I hope it'll add value in their life.
Great TED Talk, by the way, that we could probably have a whole conversation about that. That must have been terribly interesting, but definitely a great presentation. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you can find that on my website too. Okay. Isaac, I appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you, Michael. This was great. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.